Good evening and warm welcome once again. I'm Dr. Mangesh, uh, Head Medical Services, RPG Life Sciences. Welcomes you on a very unique uh, session today, which is going to be we are going to know much more about a very interesting book. And to know more about that book, we have none other than the author of this book. So let me, take this advantage to introduce our speaker. But before our speaker could introduce, let me just unveil this book. A disrupted word, a mysterious virus, and a shattered humanity, and a never-ending pandemic. And the question is, can we ever win this war? So if you see a disrupted word, that itself gives us a clue that this book is about the event, I would say, the one of the a big event all across the world, which affected billions of lives. And that event is COVID-19 pandemic. And my dear friend, uh, to reveal that to you in a way, in a collective manner, our today's author has taken a great effort to bring out in the form of a book. And today our uh, agenda would be, to know about this book from the author, Dr. Sukant Das. So he is with us. It is the first kind, my own experience I would like to share with you, that I need to have two introduction. One, as he is a very renowned nephrologist, currently working, as a senior consultant, uh, as a nephrology and in renal transplant, as in AMRI Hospital, Bhubaneswar. He has done his very, I would say, one of the best student. When he did his MD, he was gold medalist. He did DM Nephro from one of the prestigious institute in India. As you know, it is HGPG IMS. And this is his, I would say, an academic introduction. But as an author, he is, being a nephrologist, and he has written a book on such a complicated and huge event of the COVID-19 pandemic. He's very active in the blogs, videos, on social medias, and see, he has closely seen the COVID-19 pandemic. You can definitely visit if you know more about his, the writing skills, and as an author, you can visit his Facebook. He's available on his Facebook. He's available on YouTube, or even if you type Dr. Sukant Das on Google, you will get his profile. So let me just highlight few of his achievements as a nephrologist. So he is known for his, the kind approach for the patients, and I think that has helped him to go more and dig into the COVID-19 pandemic and bring out those perspectives. So he has initiated the renal transplant program at AMRI Hospital, Bhubaneswar. He has, done good number of transplant, more than 500 on his name, and he is very skilled in the advanced hemodialysis, and helping patient out. His experience and expertise are being used by across the verticals by his colleagues and the patients. And he has worked in the different multi-specialty hospitals, like in Bhubaneswar, like Kalinga Hospital, Aditya Care Hospital, and associate professor of nephrology at IMS and SUM Hospital, Bhubaneswar. He is a member of many societies. So my dear friend, I am just putting two different side of him, that being a very renowned nephrologist, and now another uh, he has a very great interest to look at the social problems, look at the medical problems, look at the the important issues which are concerned to the common public, to the people to understand. And this is his one of the effort to launch this book, A Disrupted World. So thank you so much, sir. Dr. Sukant Das, you are most welcome. And I would request you to please, brief about your book. This program is live on Facebook. You can visit the Facebook, which is the link given in the invitation, or you, even if you go in his on his Facebook account, you will be able to say. So you have to type on Facebook, Dr. Sukant Das. So thank you so much, sir. Over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Mangesh. First of all, I mean, it has been a very extensive and very, very beautiful and wonderful introduction you have given about me. First of all, my journey as a nephrologist has always been very exciting and challenging. And thank you for putting nice words and my approach towards nephrology. Of course, nephrology continues to be one of the areas where I keenly work in terms of my involvement with patients in transplantation and dialysis. It is while working as a nephrologist, as a working in intervention nephrologist, working with critically ill patients, that I come across lots of issues. And this time the issue was COVID-19. COVID-19 was something which was not just impacting me as a doctor or our patients, but it was something which was so overwhelming that it had taken the entire world under its grasp. And being doctors, it was not easy being doctors during the COVID-19 crisis, because being doctors, we were at the forefront, but we were equally susceptible to it. So we could see human tragedy from the closest of quarters, and we were warriors, and also we were victims. Those are some of the things that really inspired me, especially for those who might have gone through the book. And I have often said with people on my social media platforms, it was the devastating second wave of in India that had inspired me to come for this book. And after that, of course, the huge crisis, the way the COVID-19 crisis had overwhelmed the entire world, and the catastrophe, the kind of magnitude with which it took the entire world under its grasp, was something unimaginable and never seen before. Therefore, I was compelled, I was inspired rather, and this inspiration compelled me to come up with this book. If I can show you this book here. Of course, our discussion is going to be about this book, but I have the physical copy of this book, A Disrupted World, and how a mysterious virus, as you rightly put it from the subtitles in the book, a mysterious virus shattered humanity under the spell of a never-ending pandemic. And the common question that is in everyone's mind, that's the mind of the entire world: can we ever win this war? So if I can, if it's the time, if you tell me it's the right time, then I may be allowed to present a brief. Okay. So should I go ahead with the presentation?
Yeah, you can, sir.
Okay, absolutely. So I'll take this opportunity to introduce this book before the audience here, and of course all those people who are watching from different parts of India and also from other parts of the world. The book is of course available all over the world, and of course COVID crisis is something that has engulfed the entire world. So people all over the world, no matter whether they are students, whether they are software professionals, whether they are doctors, whether they are teachers, everyone who has braved and endured this pandemic and who has survived this pandemic, or rather continuing to do so, needs to understand something about this pandemic. So this book, as I've just mentioned, A Disrupted World. Why is this book A Disrupted World? Interestingly, the point is, before I go into little more detail about this thing, let me walk you through the contents of the book. The book First of all, of course, like all books, we have the introduction part of this book. And of course, the book is divided into 8 different parts. The part one is, of course, is about the origin and beginning of the pandemic, how the pandemic started, and how within a flash of few weeks the pandemic grasped the entire world, when the entire world community were sitting ducks, and country after country were being engulfed by the onslaught of the virus, yet no one could do anything to prevent the spread of the virus that really captured the entire world within a span of even less than 80 days. Now, coming to, did the virus really escape from a lab in Wuhan, or was it a genetic origin as being proposed by China, as being the theory that was increasingly being propelled by the country where it started its origin? Then comes the chapter or the part on how COVID-19 has impacted COVID-19 and you. That is the most important thing. Who is who is at the receiving end of the problem? It's the human beings like you and me. So how it has impacted human beings? What is the narrative? Then how it has impacted doctors, how it has impacted the intensive care unit, how people came across intensive care unit in their life for the first time, more than they ever used to. And of course, how COVID-19 impacted human beings, and what is the counter narrative for it, and how the COVID-19 has impacted children. Then comes COVID-19 and world order. It is such an event that has impacted the world order, that has really radically and dramatically transformed the world order. And what was the important, what are the loopholes, where the important gaps in the approach of the World Health Organization that actually allowed this crisis from a small place in China to grow into a catastrophic event internationally, whereas the World Health Organization had all the tools to prevent it from the beginning. Why did it really fail? Where did it go wrong? These are the important aspects that one must look into. Then, of course, we have glimpses of a post-pandemic world, and how the world has changed, and what are the long shadow the pandemic has cast off, and it is going to linger on much longer than the exact duration of the pandemic. Then there is an interesting chapter on chasing pandemics. Chasing pandemics, actually, it is to be remembered that we all know pandemics are not something new. Pandemics are as old as human civilization. But to have a pandemic in the 21st century, when we have all the tools to fight against it, was quite something unimaginable and unacceptable. Yet there was a pandemic. But let's take heart in the fact that we have had pandemics before. We need to understand how humanity has overcome these pandemics. Then there is something very interesting. There is intriguing, rather, which needs to be explored: the deadly second wave of India and its aftermath, the relentless surge and what went wrong, how the entire health care in India collapsed and crumbled during the second wave. People were crying for oxygen. People were they were gasping for air in despair, gasping for oxygen in despair. There were everything: shortage of beds, shortage of oxygen, shortage of ICU beds. Even there was shortage of crematoriums and burial grounds. The whole nation was in pain. That was something that would be remembered as one of the dark chapters in the history of the nation. And any crisis that discusses the impact of COVID on the world, India has to be included, because India has 1/5 of humanity on this planet. Then, of course, we'll go to some of the interesting aspects that we have all been through, which was, to start with, very interesting, but later on, which lingered on raising doubts in our minds. It was the flashback to the first wave of COVID-19, the Great Indian Lockdown, and of course, how Prime Minister Modi came and gave us the speech for the Great Indian Lockdown, and how the lockdown had started for 21 days, then went up for 68 days. And there was another interesting thing, how the migrant crisis came up as a fallout of the Great Indian Lockdown. And before that, of course, as I proceed into the next chapters, I had thought that let me incorporate a few things about the virus, the variants, and the mutants. Of course, most people, including common man. In fact, I have mentioned in a particular part in this book is that nobody in this world has the luxury of himself calling a common man anymore, because mm, if it had not been for the pandemic, then we could have I mean, certain amount of ignorance, certain amount of ignorance would have been a bliss. But now we all have to know something about the pandemic. So if we have to know, why don't we know really the real facts, the facts that would, if that would uh, actually separate misinformation and disinformation from real pieces of information. Often the pandemic has been called, it is, there is pandemic on one side and there is an infodemic on another side. It's our responsibility to deal with the infodemic part, to remove and dispel all the myths and misinformation that is related to the pandemic. Then, of course, importance about the vaccines, the drugs, and the promises they hold. And can we ever win the war? What are the COVID vaccines? How big it is a task to deal with? Now, vaccinating India, it's a big task. I'll come to it in when you read this chapter in detail. You can realize that it's not been an easy task to vaccinate India. Even there is a point of time when the nation actually completed 1.1 billion doses of vaccination. And that's very, very important. That's a humongous task. The nation completed 1 billion doses of vaccination. And of course, vaccinating the world, can we ever achieve it? And hunt for a wonder drug. Then comes the hunt for a wonder drug. The part 8 deals with, can we ever win the war against COVID-19? Can we ever win this war against COVID-19? Are we stuck with the pandemic forever? What is the never-ending specter of COVID? What is the risk that emanates from emergence of new variants, Omicron and beyond? The COVID-19 immunity, how long can it last? Can we learn to live with a never-ending COVID-19? What are the potential of COVID-19 being used as a bioweapon? And the last one, of course, can we make COVID-19 the last pandemic? In the afterword, there is an interesting aspect. I'll come to you when I go to the slides one by one. Disrupted World, I named this book because no other event in this world has disrupted. In recent times, no other event in this world has disrupted the world so much as that of the COVID-19 pandemic. Ever since the pandemic has taken the world under its evil menace, these are the lines from the book, if I'm allowed to read, then ever since the virus has taken the planet under its evil menace, the pandemic has left millions and millions of people dead, billions devastated, and trillions lost in economy. Even then, there are no clear signs when the world would be able to emerge out of it. Then, of course, we have the mysterious virus, as the first line of the subtitle tells, mysterious virus. The mystery behind the origin of the virus is still one of the most intriguing puzzles of our lifetimes. The question about the real source remains unanswered. Questions like where the virus came from, what was the source of the virus, was it from bats or pangolins, was it from frozen food, was it Hunan seafood market, was it the Wuhan Institute of Virology, was it some sort of divine or alien intervention? We still don't have all the answers. Was it some sort of divine or alien intervention? It's an interesting point, but we have to, that's not something we can settle with. We have to have a scientific answer for it. And this chapter deals with finding scientific endeavors and other tantalizing pieces of evidence that will explode you deep into some of the mysteries behind the origin of the virus. One of the interesting aspects is that the whole pandemic started from Wuhan and Wuhan Institute of Virology, and the bats, the culprit bats, or the alleged bats who actually carried the virus, according to the genetic theory propagated by China, were from 1500 kilometers from the Yunnan mines, or the copper mines in Yunnan. The point is that these bats do not even fly more than 50 kilometers. So how could these bats from the copper mines in China, from the Yunnan province in China, could carry the virus in Wuhan? This coincidence is really, really very striking, because Wuhan is also the place where the highly secretive virology lab of the world, Wuhan Institute of Virology, is situated. And it is here one of the important uh, characters in our book, Dr. C. Zhengli, often referred to as the Batwoman, has been involved in certain kinds of research as gain of function research. Was the virus the result of this gain of function research? Was it accidental or was it deliberate? You have to go deep into the book to unravel the mysteries behind this. Then, of course, as I have enumerated with the contents, it's a pandemic which has shattered the humanity. So there is one thing that I must say, that being a doctor has been one of the toughest parts to be in the pandemic, because it was not easy navigating unknown territories with half-baked knowledge, with fear in our hearts and uncertainty in our minds. Because being a doctor does not preclude one from being a human being. It only enhances the extent of vulnerability, because it multiplies the inherent risks of exposure from the virus manifold. These are a few lines from this chapter I'm reading. So as I go on to the next chapter, this is a very interesting line. It's one of my own favorites. As long as there is death and disease, there will be a God, there will be a doctor. That by no means is an attempt to equate God with a doctor, as the latter is almost always there when you need one. But God, being invisible, is more often in your thoughts than in shape and form. That makes God invaluable. Yet, in reality, whenever the gods have failed, the doctors have had to answer for them. And ever since the pandemic began, that is what the doctors all over the world have been trying to do, almost against the will of God. Think about those lines once again when you read this book. I'm talking about the intensive care unit. Isn't interesting that intensive care unit has been an integral part of medical science and medical treatment all along, but it is for the first time, for the first time during this COVID crisis that common people came across the intensive care unit. Have you ever been a COVID care ICU? And a COVID care ICU was not just an ordinary ICU. COVID care ICU is something far different. But in ordinary times, camera crews didn't venture into intensive care units. There were not images of intensive care unit on everyday television, but COVID changed all that. Crews ventured into COVID ICUs, and people actually, in one way, the images, the videos from ICUs were directly in front of people's smartphone screens and television screens, on newspapers, and everywhere. But have you ever been inside a COVID ICU as a patient, lying amidst other hapless patients like you, isolated away from the world that was so scared to come to you, feeling very sick and breathless? Or you might have been in inside ICU, inside a COVID care ICU, to catch a fleeting glance of someone you loved who had been admitted there, either gasping for breath or helplessly attached to a ventilator or backup machine. Or you may have been there as a doctor, as a technician, as a true warrior savior, braving the evil face to face to answer your call of duty. Then again, one day, one stroke of ill luck, despite all the protective cares, the vulnerable warrior in you finds herself down with COVID, lying amidst same patients you were trying to save. That was the irony of the COVID times. Those were the days when the intensive care unit came as the final frontier between life and death. Today, if you have survived the crisis after being admitted in intensive care unit, then always remember there was an intensivist, there was a team of intensive care unit doctors, nurses, and other technicians who were actually fighting with their own lives at risk to save your life, and never forget to thank them for it. Now, I mean, it's a big book, of course. I cannot get into individual chapters. This is one more chapter, glimpses of a post-pandemic world, post-pandemic disrupted world. History is witness to the fact that pandemics have always left the world scarred and mutilated. This time it is no different either. The long shadow the virus has cast over the world is going to linger on much longer than all its direct effects. So you have to read this chapter. There are very interesting concepts mentioned here, how the pandemic has disrupted, how the United States, the most powerful and medically and economically the most advanced nation in the world, was left lurching with the largest number of COVID cases. In early days, the most powerful nation, United States, were the doctors or nurses were falling short of PPE kits. And even today, USA has the highest number of COVID cases in the world, highest number of COVID deaths in the world. In fact, out of 500, little more than 500 million COVID deaths in the world, United States, its COVID cases in the world, more than 500 million COVID cases in the world. United States of America itself accounts for almost more than 80 million cases. And of course, the total number of COVID mortalities around the world have been 6 million, out of which around more than 1 million deaths are being accounted for by United States of America. These are unimaginable. It's not a third world country. Did you ever imagine a pandemic, an infectious disease? Even the Americans would not have believed that an infectious disease would come and grasp the entire United States in such a way that they would be the leaders at the top of the pandemic. This is not something to be proud of, but this is something to be that needs a lot of scope for introspection. But it's also a question that under this changed dynamics, is possible for the United States of America to position itself as the leader of free world, or will it be slowly and gradually replaced by an increasingly resurgent and belligerent People's Republic of China? That is something that you will have few interesting aspects in this chapter. Then as we move on, as I have mentioned, the second wave of China, the second wave in India rather. This chapter, a picture they say speaks 1,000 words. If I can read the first paragraph of this chapter. In the deadly second wave that swept through India, the media was awash with hundreds of such images and videos that would tell thousands of such tales of apathy, agony, and helplessness. How did COVID-19 get so bad in India? What really caused this catastrophic crisis? After the first wave, we were supposed to be ready with our infrastructure for any subsequent onslaught, but it didn't really happen. And the second wave really devastated nation. That this is something which must be explored and understood so that we should be able to prevent. Barely, just remember, this is the month of June 2022, and last year in the month of May and June we were going through the worst of the COVID crisis, the deadliest phase of the pandemic the nation has ever endured, and that was the deadliest phase of the pandemic. The second wave of India was the deadliest phase of the pandemic the entire world has ever witnessed. So we need to introspect to understand the reasons behind it. Then there are several more chapters. Of course, we have chapters on the, as I have enumerated in the contents, but due to paucity of time, I would come towards the most interesting aspects to the end of the pandemic, end of the book, where the question is, why is it a never-ending pandemic? Can we ever learn to live with a never-ending COVID-19? If the pandemic is never-ending, then we have to learn and devise ways to live with a never-ending pandemic. How are the possibilities in that case, whether it's going to remain a pandemic forever, or as we are seeing these days, there are increasing, even if the cases are increasing, the severity is less. So probably, and thankfully, we are moving towards a certain degree of endemicity. But before completely letting us our caution off or caution away, we need to be ensured that it's indeed going in the way of a pandemic. Before moving further, interestingly, even when the whole world was facing a pandemic, something else came that really took the level of destruction to an all new level. That is the point I have felt as I was going to complete the book. It was increasingly, as you must have seen, that the cases have come down. It seemed as if we can heave a sigh of relief. However, earlier too, as the book the lines would read earlier too, whenever the world had been lulled into giving a sigh of relief, it had been jolted out of its reverie by a spate of dreaded nightmares many times during the course of the pandemic. Only this time, the nightmare wasn't some new variant of the virus. Rather, it was in the form of a full-blown armed conflict, the war in Ukraine. The war in Ukraine, in fact, any war in the times of a pandemic has two devastating consequences. First of all, it can raise the level of devastation to an entirely new level. You may walk around pandemics, but worse, the effect out of the wars are so horrendous, so devastating, they do not even give time to respond. Now, how can a nation fight against a pandemic when a war is going on? And how can a nation prepare for war when a pandemic is going on? What is most important is that in a pandemic, we can blame a certain enemy, the virus, but in wars, human beings are fighting against other human beings. Who can you blame? I mean, have human beings gone so careless that they have stopped caring for the preciousness of other human lives? That is what is happening actually when you have, in fact, when you have dictators in power. I mean, without naming, I can say that when one authoritarian state gave a pandemic to this world, another authoritarian state raised a war, and both this pandemic and war have the ability to take the entire world into an abyss of apocalypse. That's the most devastating aspect. Yet we cannot lose heart, and I do not want to end this talk on a low note. So we have to find out certain positive points. So one of the positive points, interestingly, has been often raised by many scientists and many observers. Can Omicron be the blazing in disguise? Can we feel that Omicron be blazing in disguise? Can Omicron be the natural vaccine everyone is hoping for? But before we really feel that Omicron is the natural vaccine, we have to be really very, very careful, because yes, it's the kind of a strain which is less virulent and more transmissible. In fact, Omicron is incredibly transmissible. And there are certain caveats here. Omicron being less severe is not as mild as common cold, but thankfully the immunity that arises from Omicron so far so good, and it has been seen to protect against other variants. But only time will tell whether the combination of immunity from infections, immunity from vaccinations, and immunity from both infections and vaccinations, that is called as hybrid immunity, can it be so strong that it can protect against infection from newer variants? So there comes the question, can we make COVID-19 the last pandemic? Can we make COVID-19 the last pandemic? The pandemic has had many faces. It has been deceptive, it has been disruptive, demonic. Mankind has always been susceptible to infectious disease outbreaks since the beginning of evolution, much before science even made us understand what infections and microorganisms are. But with the help of science, with the help of our knowledge, with the help of our commitment, with the help of our collective effort, let's pledge that we can make COVID-19 the last pandemic, so that we do not, the mankind, the entire world doesn't have to go through another devastating crisis like it has had to endure. Because with pandemics, you do not get too many second chances. So that's something we must all make a pledge towards. Can we make COVID-19 the last pandemic? So with that, a challenging narrative on COVID-19 and its potential endgame scenarios, a disrupted world, I would sincerely pledge all of you to get your copies, go through this, and that will be the most rewarding experience for an author. And this book is, of course, available across all platforms in Amazon, whether you are in India, it's Amazon.in, Amazon.com, or Amazon.co.uk for other parts of the world. The Kindle version of the book too has come. So I would sincerely love and appreciate all the extensive readers of this book, so that we all get a chance to understand the pandemic and redeem ourselves, and pledge that we can really make COVID-19 last pandemic. Thank you very much for giving me a patient listening. Thank you once again very much.
Thank you so much for briefing about the book, uh, uh, A Disrupted Word. So I would like to request participants to type their questions in Q&A box. So there are a few questions already have come in the Q&A box. Right.
I
So,
can see
sir,
the questions. Yeah, you
yeah,
can.
I will just read for you. So great initiative. Avinash is writing. Book is really, it's going to be interesting as he says. So he says, uh, one thing which was highly controversial and the whole world was divided was vaccination. And the many were supporter, many were against. So what is your view and hope
Yeah,
we
of
would be
course.
able to read this in this book? So
Thank you, Avinash, for asking this question. In fact, there is an entire part in this book which is devoted for vaccination, how the vaccines were developed in record time, and what are the science behind it, and more importantly, what how the entire world is on a vaccination drive, how India is on a vaccination drive, and how within a span of few more months, I think we would be I think within a span of few more weeks only, we'll be touching a figure of 2 billion vaccine doses. That's not something small. That's a remarkable achievement. But talking about the controversial aspect of it, yes, there are anti-vaccine poster boys. This is a very interesting aspect I've dealt with in this book. You must have remembered recently. A very famous tennis star actually went because I would take his name. You would have to go through the book to read how he has positioned himself as an anti-vaccine poster boy, and how vaccine there were trucks and trucks of protesters in Canada against the prime minister. The prime minister of Canada had to be taken to a safer place into hiding because to escape from the anti-vaccine protests. But it is important that even though there may be certain people who want to protest against the vaccinations, raising certain questions, vaccination still remains our biggest hope against the pandemic. It has been proven by several studies that those people who have been vaccinated have shown the minimal amount of symptoms and have escaped from Omicron wave relatively safely. That is why vaccination still remains the best bet for the entire world. And anywhere and everywhere, wherever there is an opportunity, people should go for vaccination against COVID-19.
right, I would like to assure all participants. I personally reading this book, and I myself is finding answers to many questions. So Dr. Sukanto sir has taken all efforts to put his expertise and collect the data of all events all across the world, and he's putting the very holistic and the appropriate answers. So I would request you to, if you want to know more about COVID-19 uh, uh, pandemic, please do read this book. It's available on Amazon. Once again, I'm saying, is it available on Flipkart? Few of our attendees
Yes,
are asking.
yes, yes. It is actually available on Flipkart as well. And regarding local bookstores, it's available in some local bookstores in Bhubaneswar, but outside, I think it's much easier for you to get it from Amazon or Flipkart or Notion Press across. And Amazon, I think it's something it reaches each and every corner of the world, even if you're residing far from a mega city. Also, you don't have to be in a major city if you're living in a smaller village or smaller city. Also, I think through an Amazon order, it can reach there, as well as an order from Flipkart and all. And if someone is specially interested, you give me your address. I'll ensure we can send a request and how a book can be made available to you. We'll make sure that.
Right. Before I would go to the chat box for questions, I have a questions. When I was going through this book, I found a very interesting fact that, being a medical professional and being a medical subject and being an expert of medical subject, you have taken care of medical perspective of this COVID-19 pandemic, as well as you have taken a very keen note of social issues like exodus, how the common people got affected, and then you have also carefully touched upon the political, how politics has been affected and how the pandemic affected, and the to the politics and political perspective affected the pandemic, and the emotional aspects also you have taken care. So, one question on this key: how being a doctor, being a nephrologist, being a specialist, how did you, put yourself in the shoes of common people? I could see that exodus very beautifully. You have mentioned the how people exodus. So your answer on this.
See, I mean, COVID crisis was a crisis which actually brought together medical professionals and common people so closely and reflected each other's pains as no other crisis before. Individually speaking, I have always been intrigued by the social and medical aspect, social and the emotional aspect of medical crisis. And this was one thing which actually had no other parallel. And being passionate about looking at the alternative narratives, like could the pandemic have been stopped? Could the migrant exodus have been stopped? Migrants, who are migrants actually? They are the people. They are our drivers. They are our taxi drivers. They are auto drivers. They are maids. They are security guards. Migrants are the people without which cities would come to a standstill. Yet when the pandemic came, they were the people who had to be left, who were left out without many options, because there was so much of insecurity. Even if the government did a lot of efforts, the whole crisis was so overwhelming. The fear of the lockdown, and I mean the fear of unknown, I can say the fear of unknown, whether they would die in a city unknown and unseen, away from their relatives, a lot of other little known factors. So these are the small things which actually added, and these were the things that really inspired me to give letters and words to these thoughts and feelings.
I would say you, by this book, you have represented all stakeholders, uh, and that's the one of the great things this book could uh, have. One thing that what was the most surprising and challenging thing you found out while writing this book?
Uh, that's a good question, actually. It was it was very challenging, because every time I would write a page or one or two pages, and I would think, okay, that page is that chapter is done with, and I'll come back to that chapter after 1 week. The reality on the ground would have changed a lot, and I would have to rewrite, and whatever I had written would actually become redundant, and I would have to rewrite the whole chapter once again. It kept on happening several times during the pandemic. In fact, at one point of the time when the Delta virus has settled, and we had thought that I mean, it was during the November and December of last year of 2021 when things had settled, and I thought, okay, maybe I'm finally done with my book. Then the Omicron wave came and entirely changed the narrative, the pandemic. So those were the interesting things. So it was something which needed constant reading, exploring things, writing, rewriting, and collating all the data and representing the exact numbers every day, the numbers of vaccinations, number of cases that went on getting added. So I mean, it was quite challenging, but I was passionate about it. So I must say that even though it was a tough task, I enjoyed every bit.
I think this is one of the most dynamic subject one could imagine, and this is a very Herculeous task to write on such a subject which is every day it's changing. But we can see your book has the update on even Omicron and sub variants. So till I would say very contemporary, very up to date. So, readers, I would request you to please read and get blessed out of it. There is a question on one very important mention in this book was management part, including drugs and vaccines. What do you think the future holds in this contest?
Yeah, I love there is a chapter in this book which says the hunt for a wonder drug. We are all waiting for the hunt for a wonder drug, whether there would be a drug that can put an end to COVID. So we may not have the wonder drug yet, but we have quite several promising agents. First of all, we have recently the newly launched drugs, molnupiravir from Merck Pharmaceuticals and Paxlovid from Pfizer, which actually have got collaborated with several international agencies to make these drugs available at a reasonable price in low and middle income countries. These drugs, when given early on at the very early stages of the pandemic, or the infection, have actually been seen to be very effective in reducing mortality. And of course, we have several monoclonal antibodies, which again, given at early stage of the pandemic, is very, very effective. And the World Health Organization has also another interesting aspect, remdesivir, which was so overwhelmingly used in India during the second wave, even when the World Health Organization didn't have clear-cut guidelines. Now, remdesivir itself has been endorsed by the World Health Organization as one of the effective remedies in several certain clinical situations. So a lot of other things are coming up, and of course with vaccinations and this new a number of newer drugs, I think we are far better positioned than we were at the beginning of the pandemic. At the beginning, of course, there was a virus, there was no immunity, and there were entire 7.7 billion population in the entire world who were exposed and vulnerable. Now almost more than 65% of the entire planet has been vaccinated, and at least with one dose, and we are on the verge of India is on the verge of completing 2 billion doses of vaccines, and we are far better positioned definitely as compared to the early days.
Yeah, wonderful story. One question is that wonderful story has been incorporated in words. Congratulations to you, sir. Can you share your personal fight, challenges with COVID, and
Yeah.
its day-to-day issue till now?
Personal fight. Okay, personally, as far as getting infected with COVID, I have been infected with COVID. I think I've shared with my friends here on the platform. Dr Mangesh would also agree that he is also one of the victims of COVID. I have had COVID twice, and thankfully, with God's grace, with certain of with of course the advice from my friends and intensivists and other COVID experts, I was I got a chance to escape with the minimum symptoms. And of course, when I got infected second time with the Omicron, I was vaccinated at that time. So probably it was vaccination that played a role. But beyond my personal infection or my personal fight, the fight was there every day. Every day when the fight in terms of that during lockdown, we didn't have the luxury of staying at home. We had to go in each and every day of the lockdown. We went to the hospital, we took rounds, we spoke to relatives. We had to go into the COVID care units as well, and we had to take important decisions. Even when those days when we were short of PPE kits and short of masks, there also, and later on, every day was a challenge. Every day, as if we are fighting and braving death in its face, braving the virus in its face, and those were the challenging days. But as I have said in one place, medicine was not a profession during the COVID crisis. It came as a calling. It came as a calling, and we thoroughly were absorbed and in our call for duty. And it was a challenge, but it has been a challenge worthwhile taking.
Yeah, one more question is that, being a medical fraternity, we have seen the any medical issues would be addressed with lots of data, with care and with precision. I think questioner says that question says that why did WHO changed their opinion on, first they say it's a droplet infection, now they say it's might be airborne. First the remdesivir wasn't, they didn't endorse, then how they endorsing it, and they did delayed to declare it as a pandemic or concern. So how this uh, the virus or COVID-19 caused even a disruption in medical information?
Yes, that's something I have dealt with in a entirely separate chapter, the curious case of World Health Organization. Uh, the World Health Organization, of course, had never dealt with anything like COVID-19 pandemic before. It has got considerably great credentials in dealing with infectious disease outbreaks in terms of vaccinations along with UNICEF, but it has mostly been limited to dealing with such crises in third world nations where it has got decent credentials. But even then, it had all the required platform where it should have risen to the occasion, where it really failed. It really failed in buying to the Chinese narrative, and that is something, at one point of time, one of the famous political leaders from Japan said that whether World Health Organization should be renamed as the Chinese Health Organization, and because they were so much buying into the Chinese narrative that they did not declare travel ban in the beginning. They did not declare human to human transmission in the beginning. And that thing about aerosol transmission, yes, there were also certain discrepancies. Even they didn't say that we need face masks and all. When the whole world were already wearing face masks, they came up with telling that some kind of face covering is required. I mean, they started stating the obvious instead of putting the warning well before things had gone bad. And of course, they declared a public health emergency on 30th of January 2020, where they declared the pandemic on 11th of March. In fact, they should have declared the whole crisis as a pandemic much before. The word pandemic would have created a level of alarm for the entire world where people and nations could have taken it seriously. So there are so many interesting aspects, and I think the WHO took things a little lightly in the beginning. However, we need the World Health Organization and more than ever before. And thankfully, the World Health Organization is rising to the occasion in later days, and they are taking corrective steps. And that's a good sign that, in fact, they themselves have made a committee to decide whether that committee itself has been named as "Can we make COVID-19 the last pandemic?" So those are interesting things we are witness.
Right. No, one thing which I would really appreciate that your book has collated all events chronologically. So if one could read this book, and even I would say the decision makers, those who are public servants or those who are in politics, if they read the book, the mistakes which has happened uh, during COVID-19 pandemic, uh, sure there would be something, one collated data in your book could help to avoid the future mistakes, I would say. So wonderfully, you have kept the chronology very carefully in your book. One thing very serious, I would say, or very sensitive thing you have touched upon is potential bioweapon. So, how you tried yourself to rescue yourself from such a sensitive subject, as well as putting the narratives before people.
You see, why I raise this subject is that whether COVID-19 or any other virus can be used as a potential bioweapon. You see, these days technology has become so easy that rogue elements or terrorist organizations, these terrorist organizations, they have doctors and their scientists as their recruits, as their followers. And it's not something like a nuclear weapon or a nuclear bomb where you need a large setup. These viruses can be carried or in the guise of agricultural products, in the guise of pesticides, or in the kind of small lab equipments. I mean, these viruses can be escaped from low security labs where gain of function mutation and genetic engineering is being carried out with minimum safety standards. This is one risk. Second thing, the world, of course, not all nations of the world are equally positioned. There are certain nations which are managed by authoritarian leaders who are crazy, mad authoritarian leaders, and they may themselves pride in creating bioweapons themselves, and it's not a difficult thing for them if they sneak in, or if they kind of smuggle the small technologies or bioweapons. It's an invisible nano enemy that can devastate the world. So, soon after the aftermath of 9/11 attacks, even the nation like United States had to come across some anthrax attacks. Of course, they were very limited. But something like that, if can happen at a much larger scale, then we would be staring at something really, really scary for the entire world.
Yeah, I think a very important message I would say ki if information could have been right and at the right time, we could have at least curtail the impact of bad impact of this pandemic. So I would say that information, keeping that information before the public is and the genuine effort which you have done. So I think information is the key. The right information is the key. So that's so. One question, one of our participant is asking. Finally, the most pertinent question: can we ever win the war against this pandemic, or will it go on forever?
Of course, I don't know if I have a straightforward answer for it, but there are certain, the book has actually taken the reader on a narrative where each reader will have to find and will have to go through and find their own answers. But yes, we are almost there. We are almost there. We are gradually making the victory against COVID-19. Maybe may not come as a one point event. There, it's not that one day would come when we can say, okay, on this particular day we have declared victory over COVID-19. It's not going to happen like that. But it will definitely come down. It will be a slow and sustained fight where we have to measure, we have to accept our level of victory may not be a dramatic victory, but slow, small victories. I mean, we have to win, if I can put it, we have to win several small battles before we can win the entire war. So now our focus should be winning smaller battles so that one day when all these wins will be put together, we would be in a position where we can declare we have won the war.
Right, very rightly said by you. One of our attendees is asking, are you planning to write more books or any extension of the same book?
Talking about an extension of the same book, of course, I have planned because the pandemic is a dynamic thing. So maybe 1 year down the line, I might come with a first edition, but the revised edition of the book with some newer inputs, whatever things that would have happened in this 1 year. And talking about whether I'm planning to write book, yes, I have several unfinished manuscripts, but as you have rightly pointed out, as Dr. Mangesh has rightly pointed out, I have been extremely busy schedule. I don't have the luxury of taking weekends off, and I don't have the luxury of switching my phone off after 5 p.m. in the evening. So despite all that, I'm passionate about writing, and with all the best wishes from my wonderful friends, colleagues, and readers like you, I would definitely write, and that may be something entirely different. I'm yet to decide, but very soon I will share with you people what book I'm going to write.
Dr. Sushrut is asking that, good evening, Dr. Sukant Das. Does the virus look like exactly how been conceived by media, and should I believe it is to be after seeing it on cover page of your book at last? So
No, the cover page has been is a creative imagination, and it has a part of the world and a part of the virus. But the virus doesn't exactly look like it has been conceived by the media. In fact, if I can say, there is a particular chapter in this book where I have. There is a very interesting aspect about the virus that the book answers, and the key features. This is the chapter on chapter 26. If you look at the book, the unmistakable spiky blob that you see everywhere, the unmistakable spiky blob image of the virus that you see everywhere. It is actually a development of artistic development, which was given by, if I can read this, two wonderful names by Elissa Eckart and Dan Higgins by the CDC of Center of Disease America, where they were entrusted with this responsibility and they came up with this concept. It's a modified version of electron microscopic image of the virus, and this is the one that became a trend mark, and everywhere all over the global screens it became a trademark. What they did is actually they wanted to create something which would not look very virulent over its on the face of it. They wanted to give a face to the virus that so that people have to find something which is acceptable for them to understand it. It would look very scary. They didn't want to look, it should be very scary. On the other hand, the virus may look more appealing, but it's certainly not appealing as far as the dangers it causes. So to understand, of course, we need to have an image, but it's much more than it is in itself.
Yes, I would like to once again reiterate that the edited version of this talk would be available on the YouTube channel of Sukanto sir, as well as on RPG and his Facebook account. Also, you can see the video of it. And one of the best thing you can do, buy this book, start reading, start writing the your views on the book, and put it on the, you can put, or you can send it to the Dr. Sukant sir. It is available on Amazon. You can write your views on Amazon. Soon I am now very eagerness that I should definitely write. One suggestion which has come, that as being a doctor who has been involved in the more than 500 transplants, uh, is it possible to translate this book in the local languages? Uh,
Yeah, that's
would-
a very interesting question. In fact, I'm working on that, translating the book into Odia, my mother tongue. That I'm trying to do that, and I'm just looking for a good publisher. If you have in mind your mind, you let me know. But I've started working on it. It's still in initial phases. Probably in 2 to 3 months down the line, I would be in a position to really take it to a publisher and get it done. So just wish me good luck for that.
yeah. So uh, before we could end this session, what is your key message and concluding message?
Okay, my key message is, of course, as you said regarding this book, of course, do pick up a copy of this book and read this beautiful book. And not just this book, you develop a habit of reading. There are wonderful books on the pandemic, on so many other subjects. In a world where we remain distracted by so many other things which are less productive things, reading is a very good and productive habit that all of you must inculcate and develop within yourselves. So reading is a wonderful, whatever subject you are reading, read that, but also develop interest for reading other things that are beyond your subject, beyond academics. That is the first thing. Second thing is, of course, about our this pandemic itself. About this pandemic, of course, we are at a stage where we can call that we are gradually seeing tail of the pandemic, but we are not in a clear-cut position. So try and to be careful as much as possible, even though it's a collective responsibility, but individually do your part. Don't say that that person is not following and that person is not following. So let's do our parts, then blame others. Let's do our parts and then teach others. That's the second thing. And third thing, of course, the crisis has taught every one of us that uh, life is so unpredictable. We have to value each and every moment of our life. Do not take things for granted. Things are so transitory and ephemeral. So we have to be very, very careful about our day-to-day lives, our friends, our family, how precious they are. Value your life, value the life of your friends and people around you, and live each and every moment of your life as passionately and as fully as possible.
Thank you so much, sir. Personally, I'm thanking today's participants for asking many questions, and thank you once again, and thank you in advance that you are going to buy a copy, and it's available on Amazon. It's a bestseller in the category of bestseller book. So immediately you would find this book, and and it would be very interesting if you read this book, and if you write your comments on this book on the Amazon or on Facebook or on his channels. Yeah, and thank you so much to you, sir. I know how busy you are, and I know the pain and you have undergone while writing this book, keeping some time aside from your busy OPD and day and night. You have spent a lot of time. And thank you for, especially on behalf of whole public, I would like to thank you that bringing this book to us, collating everything chronologically, carefully, sensitive matters also you have taken very carefully into the consideration. So thank you so much for your contribution towards society. And I am really, going to read and going to write the review. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Mangesh, and thank you all the participants. I really feel honored and humbled, and I'm touched by the whole gesture and your participation. Thank you very much. Stay safe, stay healthy, and my best wishes to all. Thank you once again. Thank you.